Alright guys, I'm back. This is again the definite article for Grinder School, and in case any of you are wondering who have watched this immediately after my last video, I decided not to prompt for a burger but rather a jalapeno and beef pasta bake. So as you might be able to see, the game which is being played is 100 NL Zoom. I'm not going to go through the introduction as I did in the last video again, so if you're particularly interested in that, then I recommend you go back and watch it. Normally against a fish I'd check raise his flop, but because he's barreling 100% a turn so far, I think check calling the flop and then check raising a turn becomes a better option. And we're just going to bet this river pretty big, hoping he has some kind of queen or something that he can call with. Pretty standard hand. I mean, I don't think we can fold this. He seems pretty spazzy so far. Yeah, sure, he has some king-10 combos, but also he can have maybe queens, jacks, or whatever. But also he can have worst 2 pair, he can have a lot of spew as well. And we're getting 2 and a bit to 1, so, yeah. Okay. I think 9-6 suited here has a little bit too little in the way of barreling potential to be able to bet the flop here. So we are just going to check fold. I think I'm quite likely overfolding after checking this flop, but I'm not sure if that's how much of an issue that is. Also, we are going to be check calling lots of ace high, so it's not necessarily the case either. We can just bet this flop small against the fish. We don't really have much equity, but we can still barrel any 7, 8, 2 or 3. So that's more than enough to see bet, especially considering we expect him to be overfolding. I think 8-6 off is kind of an exploitative open from the button, but people are still under defending their blinds at 100, so I think it's probably fine. He's c-betting his board kind of small, so he probably wants to be defending pretty wide, but also because his c-bet frequency is quite low. We don't think he has many ace-x in his c-betting range, so just betting the river becomes significantly better than checking and hoping he bluffs, because he doesn't have many. He isn't likely to bet this river particularly often when we check. We're going to defend queen 5 suited, getting 5 to 1 in the big blind, and we're opening king 5 suited because of the fish in the big blind. Yeah. So again, I'd like to remind you guys that I really want to know what you want to see from me. The Introduction to Poker Theory series is continuing. I have a presentation prepared on abstract game theory principles, but I'm not certain how keen you guys would be on that relative to the stuff which I've been doing so far, considering it's certainly tougher to apply to poker. I'm probably going to run with it anyway, because I think these principles are certainly going to help you in doing your own work. But it's not something which is going to be the most important thing for you to study. I'm going to peel 3s here, considering stack depth. And I'm actually going to make a fairly nissy fold here. We can't guarantee that a queen or seven is going to be good, and obviously we're not delighted on a club either. Again, we're raising smaller in the small blind because he's overfolding his big blind quite significantly. Also, it helps he's a little bit shorter than usual. And he seems a bit spewy. I really wouldn't recommend opening hands like a7 off from the cutoff against tables with more than one decent reg left to act, just because they are going to be adjusting and probably capable of exploiting you. 7-4 suited might be a defender from the big blind with an overcall or two if he wasn't quite so nitty. The guy who opened was 13-9 over 150 hands or so. Oh, 300 hands, he just pops up on the left table there. King 5 offsuits is probably just going to be too weak to open now without reads in a small blind. Um, 10-7 suited is going to play better than that kind of hand post flop though, so we're happier to open it. When we get 3-bet small this deep, I think calling is actually a pretty decent option, just because we want to be defending a very decent portion of our range and we're getting good odds to continue. This hand is going to play decently well post flop as well. With a gut shot and 2 overs, we're going to see bet this board. And on this turn card, it's a decent spot to overbet because we expect him to raise pretty much all his strong hands on the flop. We also have pretty decent equity with our hand, and yeah, I mean, I've explained in other spots why overbetting those types of turn cards is going to be a good idea. So if you don't understand, I think it's probably best that you just ask me a thread or watch my other videos, which will explain it adequately, I think. But yeah, essentially it's the same reason that we can overbet against capped ranges overbet with a perfectly polarized range, so to speak, when we have more bluffs and value hands. This guy's one tabling. Yeah, I mentioned in the last video in this series, but in case you didn't see, I do actually tag people very quickly, more so than most. But this only means that you have to take my tags with a pinch of salt. Just because somebody's tagged as a fish doesn't necessarily mean that they are a fish. So, this river is pretty close. I don't think we can call, but I do think raising is a pretty decent option. We do block some of his 7x, and he should nearly always fold less than 2 pair, which he has a very decent amount of the time. I think my sizing there is possibly a bit big in terms of balance, but I just think if we bet smaller, he's going to side call too often. So I think it's probably a better option in terms of a better sizing option, exploitatively speaking, to make it a bit bigger than we maybe should. 9-3 suited would be a little bit too weak to defend against him, even against the button min raise anyway. Jedi Butcher is one tabling. Justin, your cash is also one tabling. I mean, seen this guy use his sizing before. Last time he did 5-bet big, so I'm not sure what it means, but he's 3-betting a lot. So I'm not exactly certain what it means. I think it's going to be a pretty decent hand to check back on this flop. It's going to play pretty well on turns and rivers. And it's also a flop that we expect him to check pretty often with pretty strong hands. I mean, we're just going to raise this exploitatively, because he seemed kind of spewy so far, so there's a greater chance that this sort of player is going to make some wacky rebluff than another player might. And I also think he has some kind of sizing help. I'm still not certain whether he's just some kind of really weird regular fish, but I guess I'll find out more as time goes on. At the moment I'm leaning towards a fish. King 10 is a pretty loose against the best defender, against the best in the call on his turn. But considering his sizing and how draw heavy it is, I think it's probably okay. This is actually a kind of shitty spot for us here because the big blind has a really easy bet with a really wide range. The question is how often he's going to show up with Ace Jack here, considering his sizing. He seems pretty aggressive. He doesn't like folding very much, so that's pointing towards him having a lot of draws. I mean, he can also have a lot of clubs. He was getting 5-1 pre, so his range is wide. He's going to have a jack sometimes, but I think we can probably call here. Yeah. And also, King 10 is actually pretty high in our range. We do check back some jacks on the flop, but we're just obviously always calling those. Notice that this fold with I don't know where we... Okay, this fold blind against a 3-bet with 10-7 suited is distinct from the other one because the effective stack is shorter. And also he made it a little bit bigger. I think a mistake that I do see a lot of microstakes players make is checking back this sort of flop. Because they think they crush the board and so they better give their opponents a chance to catch up. The problem is that you just miss a huge street of value from ace-x. I don't think we really want a 3-betting range on this flop. It just seems like a spot where we'd rather let him blast off than do anything else, and when he checks a turn it just makes so much more sense for a range to bet turn river. It's a bet river pretty, the turn pretty small because it's going to be tough for him to defend. When he does call the turn, it's pretty clear he has some showdown value. We don't have that many bluffs in our range, but I do think we have enough to bet a little bit over half pots. If he jams, it's going to be so gross, so yeah. That's actually quite an interesting hand. I might have to look at that later. Okay. Against a fish, I think we can probably 3-bet this, just because they're going to fold so often post-flop. That's not really a flop we want to see bet though. I just don't think a fish is going to fold that very often at all because they have so many straight draws, and I also think we get to see free turns and river cards pretty often. Guessing 4-1, we probably need to peel with this, though we're not delighted about it. And now we can just fold. I'm actually not sure about the flop play in that one, so I'm going to look at it later. If this guy... Okay, this guy's playing 3 tables, so I think it's a pretty decent spot to cold 4. We're going to make it pretty big, because it's a small 3-bet and also we're pretty deep. But we can't really call. We block aces, queens and ace-queen. Which he might 3-bet, which is good for us. It's not good when the button calls here. We're just always behind on the river, so we're just not going to put any money in the pot here. Obviously, if they cut off 5 bets, then we're pretty much dead, so we don't really want to be putting any money in the pots. This is definitely a C bet because we have a decent amount we want to bet for value here, and we have some. We can bluff a lot, and also we don't have many bluffs on this board. Just thinking about sizing, if we bet first 17 here, it'll be 75. It'll be 115 to 75 in the pot on the turn, so we probably want to bet a bit bigger. Just to threaten stacks by the river. I don't think this guy's 3-betting often, but I do think we want to be 4-betting this, especially this deep. I'm sure you guys know this already. Well, most of you probably do anyway, but we make 4 bets bigger out of position. It's deep, especially out of position deep, because the rationale of getting odds to call 5 bets with pretty much all of our betting range simply doesn't apply anymore. If we bet, say, 24 here, there'll be 100 in the pot on the turn, and that's enough to threaten stacks. I think about half pot is probably best. And although he can have some, if he raises a flop, it's just a spot where I don't think we can be folding ever. He shouldn't really have any pairs in his range there. So the only hand which could really beat us, which is in his range, is 6-5 suited. And if he has that in his range, there are also a ton of semi-bluffs that he can have. Despite the guy who's 3-betting quite aggressively on our left, because the small blind's a bit of a nit and the big blind's a fish, I think we can open Queen 8 suited here. We'll actually be opening an 8-5 off if it's folded to us on a button as an exploitative thing because of the fish in the big blind and the guy who's really under defending his blinds in the small blind. This seems like a pretty standard defend, especially against a fish. Yeah, I'm aware that some of, especially the microstakes guys, who I don't think a fish is folding ace high there, so we're not going to bluff. I'm aware that some of the microstakes guys, especially those who have watched a lot of older theory which says we should play very tight out of the blinds, might be surprised at the range I'm defending in this video, but it's actually pretty tough to overcome the great odds we're always getting pre against a button min raise, for instance, which actually indicates we should be defending pretty wide pretty often. King 10 suited here I think could be a call or a 3-bet because he's c-betting 91%, albeit over a pretty limited sample. I think he's making sufficient post-flop mistakes that calling becomes slightly better. We're just going to 3-bet this always. But yeah, that's just not a good board for us to do anything with King 10 of diamonds on. I think this is going to be a pretty good spot for us to protect our range for calling 4 bets by flatting aces here. I mean, his sizing sort of works contrary to that because it indicates he might have a stronger range, but I still and also it militates against us having a range of calling 4 bets, but I still think we do want such a range, and I think the EV of such a range is increased significantly by including aces in it. If we see bets this flop, it's going to be pretty close between calling and jamming. I think I marginally prefer jamming, just because we can still play most hands in a vacuum, and we should be perceived to have a ton of bluffs here, and so I just don't think he's folding any overpairs. I mean, we get it in, if we get it in pre, we can obviously get it in pre and stack him that way, but against the rest of his range, I think this line is marginally better. That's not to say, by the way, that I think that flatting 4-bets out of position and then check raising flops is going to be a good thing to do very often. It's just in that situation we can have, because we're squeezing, we can definitely have jacks, so we can definitely have a check raise range. We can possibly have a 8-6 suited. Because there's this bad reg in the big blind and a fish and a nit behind us, we're going to open King 9 suited here. Yeah, it's certainly a very situational thing. The play with aces there on the flop, though I think, as a default, when you're out of position using, especially when you're out of position using aces as part of your range for calling 4-bets, is probably going to be good. Because we're a little bit deep, I'm not going to use ace-jack off as part of my 3-bet range here. It's just a situation where we'd much rather have hands like 8-7 suited, which we still can't call, but I'm just going to play better post-flop, and can also more happily call 4-bets. King-Queen suited, pretty standard defend there. Because this guy's c-betting so often, despite the fact that we have pretty minimal equity, I think we can bet that turn, because he's just got such a weak range when he checks back. Squeezing here to isolate the fish, and we're just going to bet small and expect to take it down a lot of the time, despite his relatively low fold to flop c-bet. And I mean, ace high is good here some of the time. It's just that if he's betting all over pairs, it's just not good enough for that sizing. We're making this a bit bigger because we're 200 effective. And I mean 200 big blinds, by the way, not $200. Big blinds are always more relevant than, are always relevant, and dollar amounts aren't really, except insofar as some guys might have psychological problems with the dollar amounts in either very big absolutely or very small absolutely pots. This is pretty close, getting 5.5 to 1 with a fish in the pot, but because of rake I'm going to fold this. I mean, we don't want to fold very much against a min-raise, against a small blind min-raise, but 8-3 off is just so crap a hand that we can probably fold it. I wouldn't be folding 7-2 suited though, for instance, in that spot. Ace 10 off, pretty standard open. Just going to quickly retag that guy's in nit, just because it's going to be useful for just quickly glancing at tables in the future, which is what you should probably be using most of your tags for in Zoom. Your colour tags, just adjusting your opening ranges without really having to look at everybody's stats. So the things that you should be tagging are things which will actually affect your opening ranges, rather than anything else. With reg tables it's slightly different because they're also a valuable table selection aid. So tagging regs and fish is more important than, for instance, tagging regs you fold too much to steals, especially considering a reg who's on your left is going to be on your left for the whole session. But yeah. It's still probably important in both to tag pretty quickly. We really don't want to be folding much to this 3-bet sizing, but unless the fish cold calls and he doesn't, we're just going to be folding, because 8-7 off is a really crap hand to play in a deep 3-bet pot. Okay, that's odd. Ace-9 suited is actually pretty close to a 3-bet against a small blind min raise, and that would be for value. But the other thing is this guy plays pretty horrendously post-flop. He doesn't barrel turns very often at all. And also he's opening his small blind pretty tight. So that works against it. This is pretty close between a bet and a check. I'm just going to check back this time. And because this guy is simply not folding to 4 bets, but he is incredibly spewy post-flop, we are going to call with ace-6 suited here. What's he betting in 3-bet pots even more aggressively? I mean, we don't have many bluffs, so he's just going to make it small, and this also works because there isn't much he can call with that we beat. There isn't much he can call with altogether, rather. This is close to the worst turn card for us. I'm just going to take a quick look at his 3-betting range. I mean, it looks like he's just been running good, so we don't have any concrete information on what his bluffs are. So I think that's probably just going to be a turn fold. Pre is pretty marginal, to be honest, with 8-6 suited specifically. 8-7 suited is almost certainly a call. We're opening 5-6 suited under the gun because there are guys who don't 3-bet much here and here. There's a fish in the big blind and also a fish under the gun +1. Yeah, and we're just going to be able to get away with c-betting this flop super wide and giving up on a turn of turns. If we were checked to on that river, in theory we should be bluffing, but it's a spot where the theory just doesn't matter against the fish, because after he check calls ace-8-2 rainbow, there isn't anything he's really folding to a check turn bet river line. 7s isn't quite strong enough to value bet, but we definitely have to call against the bets. And again, against the fish, we don't have to size big with our c-bet. We could consider barreling this turn because we do have 2 overcards. That works better against fish who we know are folding something more reasonable like 40% to c-bets. And we're just going to bet big in case he decides he wants to call with a pair. And he calls with ace-queen. Okay. That's going to happen sometimes, of course. But it would be pretty horrific to miss that value bet there. But yeah, I mean, the fishier the pool is, the less balanced your stats are going to look. But so, for instance, you will often end up with 70% flop c-bet and 35% turn c-bet in a weak pool. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. 3-betting is bigger because we're a bit deep. It's also pretty decent hands of 3-bet in this spot. It's probably also strong enough to call. And I think we probably want to be calling that 4 bets because he definitely has some kind of 4-bet range. Though that's just a flop on which we want to be check folding. I mean, even after he checks back, we don't really want to start bluffing here because we simply have no equity when called. Though we can probably get a value bet in on this on rivers. 5-4 should probably be a c-bet. This is pretty close here. He just doesn't have an ace very often at all when he checks 3 times. I mean, I don't think we win very often at all at showdown, but it's very low in our range, and he's no way in hell that he should be checking back that river. But yeah, he's never folding that. Yeah. If we do bet that river, we are significantly over bluffing, and also if he just shows up with kings there all the time, then it's not going to be a profitable bluff. Okay. that's good. Because it's a wet board and we're playing a fish, we could just go pretty big with all of our sizes. Yeah, I mean they're more likely to fold rivers than any other street anyway. But I still think they're going to struggle to fold top pairs, so betting 80% pot on the river is okay. Just a pretty standard call here. This deep, I think King Jack is just going to be a fold. We're definitely going to be floating this flop pretty wide, so I think we can bet about 2/3 pot on the turn pretty comfortably. What's 2 tables? Just against a 2.2x, I really don't think we can actually fold Queen 2 off. I mean, it's not a good hand, but we're getting wonderful odds and we're guaranteed to be in position. He's probably raising pretty wide range. And I think our hand's actually strong enough to check down here. Yeah, okay, that's... His play post-flop is really bad. Just because he just doesn't have any showdown value. So he'd really be sticking in a bluff somewhere. Probably the turn, because he does have some equity and he doesn't have many hands in his range that he can bluff with equity there. Again, we're just really raising his button super wide because his small blind's overfolding a lot to steals. One tabling, and okay, he's open limping, which is just going to be a fish, and yeah, all day, every day. King Jack off is probably a decent enough hand to squeeze here. There's a decent chance that our opponent here is going to be overbluffing his turn, and 8 is pretty high in our range in his spots. That's not a good river card for us though, because a lot of his bluffs got there. What's this guy? He's not folding much in 3-bet pots, so we're just going to fold the spot. And with King Jack here, we're probably going to bet turn river. We don't have much in the way of showdown value, and we can be perceived to play some value hands like this, especially the ace queen type. And it's super low in our range. Okay, it's not that low in our range in terms of showdown value, but we don't have any showdown value, and also we have equity against a lot of his calling range because we have 2 overcards to loss of it. King 7 is going to be a check call on this flop, and a fold on the turn. I mean, he's barreling super often. Okay, that's quite interesting, his sizing, but yeah, he's barreling super often, but it's just not. It's not quite good enough to be. It's not quite good, weak enough that we can actually just be explosively folding a flop and defending tight against him, because we're going to get barreled so often. But equally, it's not. It's quite a wet board, so we can afford to see that pretty big. Where was I? I'm sorry, I've forgotten what the hand was I was talking about. I mean, maybe, okay. Yeah, King 7 is a hand that's going to win sometimes at Showdown there, so I don't think we really want to be folding on the flop, because it's just pretty high in our range as well. But on the turn it becomes pretty low in our range, and it's just not really going to be strong enough to use as a check raise bluff. We're betting pretty small on this river because all of a sudden we don't have many bluffs. Like, a lot of our flop and turn c-bets, which we bet because they had some kind of gut shot or overcard or something, or open-ended. He just has Queen Jack here. We can fold this pretty easily. I'm just going to finish talking about the hand first. Yeah, all of a sudden they've hit the river. So Ace Jack obviously has a pair, Queen Jack has nuts. We probably don't see bet nines, etc. here, and we don't really have any spade combos either, which don't have anything. So if anything, from a balance perspective, it should be even smaller. On the river, roughly the same rationale applies to him. He just doesn't have any bluffs when he jams that river after calling 2 barrels and not run up. I mean, I'm pretty confident that's the case, but I'm just going to check it later. But it's really tough to see what he can be bluffing with here. I mean, even if he calls Jack 9 pre, that got there, Queen Jack got there. He pretty much has to be turning stuff like queens into a bluff. And considering his sizing, I don't think he's going to be doing that often enough to make it a profitable call. Can't fold against the min bets. And I mean, we can just play Ace King as showdown value here pretty easily. I'm going to take quick notes. I'm going to call that a weak made hand. This is a guy that borrows often, so Queen 10 is going to be pretty nice to defend and try and flop a pair. Though against him, it's going to be alright just to fold the flop. Yeah, I mean, because he is barreling so often, we do want to be raising pretty wide on every street, both for value and as a bluff. It's just that we still haven't been in the sort of parts of our ranges that we could use, even exploitatively speaking. Yes. I think 9-5 suited is going to be a decent enough hand to 3-bet here. We could also probably just about call, but I think 3-betting's a little bit better. And we're going to be opening 7-4 off because we've got the sameness in the big blind and a guy who's pretty tight in the small blind as well. Because we do have 2 sort of backdoor gut shot hands, I think we're going to be happy enough to see betting this. But on this turn card, I think it's going to be floating wide enough that we can check call. The river, okay. Let me think about his range for a second and stop playing and talking so quick. So I do think he has a lot here. Has a loss of 7s through 9s here. I don't think 5 is going to be something that we really want to be bluffing here. Just because we have so many better hands to bluff with, and occasionally he checks back Ace Jack, etc. on the river, and we win, and that's more than occasionally. But also, I'm struggling to. Okay, yeah, I'm struggling to see what he's bluffing with here. Also, I have a note that he's disinclined to bluff with showdown value, with no showdown value, so that's militates against him having a strong enough, against him having a large enough bluffing frequency to call there, despite the fact that we rarely check many better hands than a 5 on the river there. Jack 5 off is just too weak to defend. And where are we? Okay. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with this pair of videos, just because there really haven't been many spots in which there hasn't been anything to talk about. We're c-betting big here because it's such a wet texture, and we're going to do so with our entire c-betting range. 7 is 2 strongest fold on this board. possibly going to be too strong to fold on the turn, considering we're going to be floating a lot of Broadway stuff with a heart on that board. And obviously, if we're gonna bink the river, it's just gonna be great. We do have a fair amount of misdraws here, so we can bet pretty big. Also, he's Montenegrin, which means he's a snowy guy, so he almost certainly has a calling range on his river against most non-ridiculous sizes. Yeah, okay, so that's quite interesting that he's double barreling 9s there. I'm going to take a note on that later because I need to talk to my coach, to my coach, about what specifically to note in this kind of spot, because I'm starting to shy away a little bit from just taking brief notes of individual hands, because they're pretty slow to read while playing. They're a bit too slow to read it while playing, especially if you've got a fair few. And also, you have to interpret what it means about how they're playing in individual spots. I mean, it's in terms of how they're deviating from a balanced strategy. I mean, it's definitely going to be good if you don't really have enough experience to know how people are deviating from balanced strategies just intuitively. This is pretty marginal turn call, but I think it's just about alright. And we're just going to check raise this river because I expect him to bet bigger with a set, and also it's lower. It's pretty low in our range. Okay, yeah. Wow, I'm honestly surprised he didn't just jam that river. But yeah, it's going to happen sometimes. But yeah, in this spot, arguably we want to be check raising lots of our sets on the turn, which is an argument against having a big river check raising range, which this would indicate. Though on the other hand, it's really tough to see better hands to check raise than this on a river, because this doesn't block clubs, which is good. I don't think we have any 7x in our pre-flop range really, or obviously 3x, etc., that's block stuff. This is close. I think we can just about peel with the backdoor straight draw. So if we want to check raise 8s here, which we do, and we probably show up on this river with 8s, then we think he's probably folding a king as well. We're 2.5xing because it's a fish, and thus probably overfolding. We'll also be perceived, even if we don't, to have some combos of sets in our range, of other sets in our range. Possibly, I don't think we can actually check raise pocket 3's value on the river here. Just because, well, for the reasons that we've mentioned, essentially that we can bet to try and fold our sets. Fish, he probably has a sizing tail, so we're going to fold here. So, despite the fact that we only really rep 5 value combos, I also don't think that the population is going to be perceived to bluff here very often. A few are actually also going to start flatting kings here pre, which would obviously be a very standard line, but most of his calling range, which could be exploiting, which is what we're really concerned about, does have a king in it anyway. And obviously he just can't fold sets just because they're ridiculously high in his range here. This is assuming that he's 3-barreling aces and ace king, and probably king queen, and hopefully some bluffs. But yeah, if he's folding, let's say for a second that he has sevens and fives in his range, but not threes or eights or kings, which seems pretty reasonable. Okay, let's give him half the combos of threes, or one combo of threes, because half is 1.5. He would have, well, 3 combos of sevens. Let's also give him 2 combos of fives rather than 3, because he doesn't always see bet that. 2 combos of fives, 1 combo of threes. That's 6 combos which are bet calling, as opposed to, let's have a look here. Well, instantly 12 combos of ace king, 6 combos of aces. And let's give him a third of the combos of ace queen, of king queen. So that's 4 combos. So that's 22 combos overall. The value combos that he's folding. It's just too high on our range to fold. And also he beat a ton of stuff with queen 9. So even if he doesn't always fold all of that range, then our river check raise is going to be super profitable, especially if we can then assume that he's going to have some triple barrel bluffs, which he probably does. I mean, he has like queen jack of clubs, which seems like a pretty mandatory triple barrel. He probably has jack 10 of clubs, maybe 10-9 of clubs, 9-8 of clubs, etc., etc. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be sitting out the next big blind and finishing this video series here. I think it's actually been a really interesting series. Like, there's been a ton of interesting hands and lots of fun spots to discuss. I think that's partially created by the reg heavy player pool at this time, although there are still clearly plenty of fish about, and I don't think it's quite as bad on Mondays as it would be on, say, Wednesday, especially on evenings. But yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed it. I do hope there is just going to be one last interesting hand to finish on a high note. I think we can probably just see about this for value/protection against the fish, using its completely exploitative sizing as well. And we're actually going to see about this for value against the fish. And we just can't fold this on the river. I mean, I don't know why he's betting jack 10, but fish are going to do that sometimes. Yeah, we're just going to try and get shot on. He might have been induced by a small bet, but when he pots the river, we're just guessing he's been tricky on the turn or something, more often than he's just spazzing the river. Okay, so thanks guys. I have been the TheDefinitiveArticle for Grinder School. This has been my first 100 NL Zoom video series. I mean, as you can tell, it's been pretty profitable at the tables. And I also think this has probably been my best video series to date in terms of how interesting it is. I'd watch it, and I have pretty exacting standards with training videos. So, thanks guys.